Hey Legionnaires, Omegon Edge here and welcome back to another video. Today we're talking about colour harmony, and in practice we'll also be looking at how we can ensure that when we're mixing colours we don't end up with unwanted results. So let's jump in. Over the years I've painted a bunch of different models exclusively in oils, and when I put these pictures of my work online, the positive feedback is almost always involved around my colour choices. Now you'll remember in the last episode we spoke about the importance of value and how a well executed painting utilises a strong foundation of values, and colour is just something that can be attached onto it. Well, this is mainly because colour is subjective. However, values, when used in relation to volume and shapes, are principal to a successful painting. Now, I tend to only really use the colours I like: greens, blues, cyans, reds, etc. And you'll probably have some of your own, but there's no doubt that sometimes our colour choices may not always work together. So this is where colour harmony comes in. But Josh, what is colour harmony, you might ask? Well, I think we understand what colour is, but for harmony, let's Google the exact definition. Now, the Oxford Dictionary defines harmony as the quality of forming a pleasing and consistent whole, and/or the state of being in agreement or concord. Okay, so to help us understand this, we can add a couple of words. For the first quote, we can say the quality of forming a pleasing and consistent image, and for second, the state of colours being in agreement or concord. We can see how this now relates to our subject. Cool, so in essence, harmony refers to how colours on our painting or miniatures sync together. As an example, let's take these colours from Adobe Color. Now, there's two important topics to this video which I want to focus on. Here, I'm using a split complementary colour wheel, which means a combination of colours opposite and next to each other on the wheel. I'm also using both high and low values of these colours. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that these colours are all pretty loud and difficult to read at once. However, once we start to bring our colours together across from the opposite sides of the colour wheel, they slowly start to lose their saturation. These are what we call chromatic greys. You'll also notice that the colours become easier to read together. It also leaves a space to have a primary colour which can be more saturated, whilst the other colours are much more muted. Understanding how to mix your own greys is a topic all in itself, but for now, just remember that using colours from opposite sides of the colour wheel will give you grey. Now, in oil painting, chromatic greys can be desired, but sometimes you'll want to layer on top of a colour without making a grey. For that, we have to understand what happens to colours when we mix them and how they function around the colour wheel. So for the subject of colour theory and colour harmony, I'll actually be splitting my video into two parts. For this first exercise, we'll be demonstrating how the colour wheel can be used to help us mix colours we want without having to wait for our layers to dry. And for this, we'll actually be using a Seraphim warrior. I actually really like the Seraphim models, and finally a good friend of mine was able to gift me a whole new set of the army set that was released like a year ago. So I've actually got an excuse to actually start painting, and can't wait to share this tutorial with you guys. Okay, so on to the palette. So for this model I've decided to go for the red side of the colour wheel, the warmer side of the colour wheel rather, and I've decided to use Scroll White, Vermillion, Antique Pink and Red Muave, and this is actually from the skin pack from Scalecolor. I really enjoy working with these colours due to their consistency, their smoothie consistency, and so I find them really easy to paint with. And I'm just making something just slightly thicker than a prime glaze. We're not using the prime glaze for this technique. We're just going to kind of thicken it up, and I'm trying to go for this dark red, this I guess it's almost like what's it called, alizarin crimson red, but I'm just trying to use opaque paints. I really want good coverage on the model. So here it is, and I'm just going to go over the model and start liberally applying that until the grey primer it's gone. So for the most part, I like to prime my models in black, and then I spray a grey primer over that just as a zenithal highlight. For the most part, I'm doing everything by hand. I barely use an airbrush these days, so I'm just applying that over with a size 3 brush, going over to all those areas that I'm going to want red, and we'll do that, and we'll just basically do that until majority of the model is completely covered. That includes the skin on the stomach and on the inside of the tail, getting into all those crevices. Now, oil paints are really nice because with a model like this, where, you know, sometimes the paint takes ages to get into all of those cracks, you'll actually find that using oil paints in this way is really effective, because they automatically, just like the thinner in the paint, actually automatically goes into all of those crevices. Now, the reason I'm starting from a red base, despite the fact that I'll be working, you can see blue and turquoise blue on the side there, and also I've got from Gamblin, I've got their vibrant, or what's it called? What is that called? Radiant, sorry, radiant green and the radiant yellow, and you'll see what happens when I mix those colors together, the effect it has, and how I can actually transfer that onto the model. So getting into all of those crevices, making sure nothing's kind of covered, nothing's missing, and just covering all of the areas I need to. Once that's done, I clean my palette and I start preparing all of the kind of highlights that I'll be having for this model. For the most part, I'm just trying to mix in the colors that I need. I'm going to go for like a lighter shade of red and then into a kind of darker level. I've actually got some white on my brush, so you can see how ineffective that is as I try to add it in. So the next thing to do would be to just clean this off, which I do here. Just clean it off, wipe it, and then slowly start trying to add in some more red. So just get a neutral red. And so for this, you can see the effect the radiant yellow has, how it makes this really like warm color. And that's the thing with radiants, they're not actually like the way I've been using them, at least, and my limited use of them is more to use them as ways to saturate colors. You can see how we don't get an orange with that yellow, we get this really it's really beautiful, really pale desaturated reddish orange, like a kind of sunset color. And then I'm going in with some pure yellow that I had on my brush, but on my palette, that I've decided not to actually use here. But you don't have to do that, it's more if you have it. You can use there's a yellow in the primary pack that you can use of the scale colors. I've just decided to add that in, and I'm basically going to be using that on this model. So next up, I grabbed the turquoise, and you can see I'm starting to add in some of that magenta color in order to get this nice violet, just to deepen the blue there, but not too much. And then I add in the radiant green, and you can see how it makes this really beautiful greeny blue color. And all of this will make sense when I start actually applying it into the model. That's actually going to be for opposite sides of the way I apply. And then I start applying these like a bit of thinner into the model, just to thin my paint into the paint rather, just to thin it so that I'm not getting really thick brush strokes. We really want to loosen up the surface of this paint. Even though it's very creamy, you can see how the strokes are kind of left behind. And so what I'm trying to do by doing this, by adding a bit of thinner in, is I'm breaking up those particles and just flattening it out. And then you can see how strong that yellow is now. It's not got the red in it. Interestingly, you'll notice there that I took some of the blue and I mixed that into the green. So this is the main way that we'll be moving around the color wheel, because you can see there, as I've added some red, I get this grey color, which is if I go straight from the complementaries, if I go straight across the color wheel, you'll end up getting into a chromatic grey. But for us, in order to layer on all of these different colors, we actually need to work a way around the color wheel. So at this point, I've left the model to dry for about 10 minutes. And what I've done is I've picked up some of this warmer red, and I'm just applying that to the kind of top areas of the scales. So all the areas where I think they will be in highlight, you can see from the reflection of the light from my lamp on the scales, you can see what parts are being kind of lit. I'm basically following that as a guide, and I'm applying these warmer tones onto those areas. Now, this is as much as a test for me as it is a lesson for you, because in theory, when I was doing this, I believed it should work, and I wanted to try it and prove it for myself. So there's a lot of experimentation in this video, but you'll see as I go around, it will start to make sense. So what I'm doing here is I'm just applying some of this mixture. It is thinned a little bit, and you can pretty much have as much fun as you want. You can use as much as the warmer side, but for this first part, just focus on using the warm side first, and then you'll see me go into the cooler area. And again, I'm just applying this color over to those lit spaces, all of the areas that I think would be getting, all the scales that would be getting hit from the sunlight. I'm not too bothered about the intricacies of the scales and how light would refract off of them. What we're just interested in is just getting those colors onto the model and getting making sure that we've got like a jump between the base red and the light red. And because we applied that kind of thicker coat of the prime glaze, the paint's going over there really easily, and it's not really blending. It's just really easy to layer over. So just give this part a go and see if it helps. So at this part, I'm pretty happy with what I've layered on, and I start to take my dry brush and start smoothing off the excess brush strokes that I've created with my application brush. And right now, we're not going over too much. We really want to be delicate and gentle with our brush stroke, moving in a downward motion over each of the scales. And you can just see I'm going over probably about a couple of times over each area, just to smooth out those transitions until I feel like I've removed a lot of the brush strokes that were on there. Now, I think it's okay to have some brush strokes whilst you're applying the oil onto your models, but really we don't want any lumpiness, so it's important to just kind of edge those out. The next thing you'll notice I did is I've taken now this warmer yellow color, and what I'm doing now is that I'm starting to warm up those scales. So all the areas that I feel like would have most of the light, that's what I'm starting to apply onto the model. So I'm starting to warm up those spaces, really bring in some of that color from that vibrant radiant yellow from the Gamblin radiant yellow, and just starting to go over to those areas to kind of draw some attention. But this is also acting as a kind of like layered highlight, as well as a way for us to start moving around the color wheel. So if you remember when I was mixing, you'll notice there's like a little bit of green. That will be actually useful. In a moment, you'll start to see how I can use that across the model. So again, just focus on the raised areas for now, making sure that I get into all of those like reflective spaces, and I'm just using the light to kind of guide me as I go around. Again, what you need to make sure you're doing as you're doing this exercise is every single time you do a layer, just take your dry brush and blend it softly. You don't need to leave it for you can leave it for a couple of minutes if you want to let it settle, and then you're just going to want to blend off any of the excess, but you can still see as it keeps its vibrancy. I'm not dry brushing to the point where I've removed that intensity of the color. If you really want to keep that intensity completely, then I would recommend not dry brushing at all. But just making sure if you've used a thin layer, you'll be able to keep this saturation that we've acquired. So now my finger's blocking, but I went into the kind of greener area there. Now, if I tried to do this, right, with jumping from red to green, I would start to get a gray. And so to prevent that, now, because of the yellow as the base, I'm actually able to work my way around and start applying this color on top of that yellow area. And this is a special thing, because with oils, the alternative to this is basically to leave it to dry. But for us, if we don't necessarily want to do that, but we still want to get this color in, we can now use that previous layer as a way to create interest, but also we can kind of start to go over now with this green color. And I think it will become more apparent. I can probably start to mix in a bit more green, if I'm honest, just to kind of bring that effect. It's starting to kind of go from a warmer yellow into a yellow green. So this is a way that we kind of start to pique the interest on the model and start to kind of just like start moving around again the color wheel. So I start mixing a little bit in. And now that I've got that green, I can actually start using some of this turquoise to kind of cool it down. And you'll start to notice that, like, yes, like you can probably see it there now, that my area is becoming more and more blue, more and more cyan, of that kind of Caribbean blue, that greeny cyan color, as I start applying. And I'm just going to keep repeating this. The first layer won't be enough, it's not going to be an immediate effect, but as that starts to kind of dry, as that starts to take hold, the blue will start to corrupt the colors we had on there before, and we'll start to get more of an effect. And this is what allows us to unlock, you know, those interesting colors that we couldn't use before. Now with acrylic, I'm sure as it dries faster, you could probably do that almost straight away if you really wanted to. But I don't think you get the smoothness of the transition, the subtleness of the transition with acrylics. It takes a lot longer. But with oils, we can actually get that in a lot of easier way. So whilst that's drying, I basically, you notice that I went into my kind of dark blue / purple, and with all the areas out of direct light, this is where I start adding in that darker blue, that mixture that we've made, which was the blue turquoise mixed with the red mauve, which is essentially like a magenta color. And I'm mixing that now into all of the areas out of direct sunlight, all of the areas in shadow, all of the plates. If you think about the scales, there's just armored plates. All of those plates which are facing away from the sun, facing downwards, I'm adding that blue into them. And this is just to create a bit more interest. We want contrast in those areas, so we want the red to really stand out. So you can see there that I'm kind of painting and blending. I'm using an artist Opus size 0 for this exercise. You can probably do this with a size 1 if you really want to, but this just gave me more accuracy. And I found actually not using a sharp brush for your work, when I actually end up buying a new brush and I start using it again, I'm like, oh, okay, I've really gotten used to using bad brushes, or a brush that had kind of outlived itself. So switching to a newer brush and trying this exercise is definitely advised. But of course, you don't need to be doing this on the Saurus model. You can do this on any model, as long as it kind of like you feel like you'll be able to make sense of it. And try this exercise. The biggest part of this exercise is making sure that we get those color transitions throughout. So now, because of that blue, right now, because of the blue there, I was able to go straight to cyan, because I'm respecting this side of the color wheel. And what I'm basically making is a kind of reflection. I'm trying to make the underside have a bit of a like kind of glow. I guess this idea kind of came from a bit of like fish scales, and I wanted to see if I can just get like, I guess, a kind of stylized look, abstract stylized look. I mean, it doesn't make sense, I don't think, depending on, I don't really know too much about the Sephiron, to be honest, but I thought this would just be a really cool technique, a little cool technique to try on these models and see how it goes. So going into all of the areas in direct shadow, again, if you can, you really want to leave some of those darker blue areas intact, so that you can like edge highlight them, or add in that cyan blue whilst also keeping the darker blue in place. The blue acts as a natural shadow to the red. It comes like this kind of purpley color, and it acts as a natural shadow to the red. But when we add in that cyan blue, we're actually helping pick out a bit more of the details. So it's actually a really nice technique to try and see if you can really, how far you can go with it. You could probably spend a lot longer on this, but you can see, especially there on the shoulder, where the cyans kind of come out, like how quite cool and interesting that is. So at this point, I started to like mix some other colors into it to see if I could get a different effect. And I end up using this as part of the skin, so you can see all these desaturated colors I'm starting to get by mixing these other colors together. I'm getting these kind of reddish browny colors, but also a bit of gray in there as well, and that just comes from mixing and contrasting colors opposite on the color wheel, mixing that red with that gray, with that green gives me this nice like warm greyish colour. So let's try that out in the next section. So for the next part of this tutorial, we're going to be painting the skin, which is the fleshy underside underneath all those scales. And for this, I'm actually just using the technique we did in the, I think it was episode 3, where we looked over just hard lines and strokes and brush strokes. I'm not going to be too like on point with this part of the skin because it's going to be smooth and blended, and then we'll kind of create that texture again. But what I was basically doing was just using the different parts of the grey. You can see how it starts to kind of mix into this kind of reddish underlayer, because that area is still drying, the oil is still active, it's just not wet, so it's not rubbing your paint away, but it is kind of corrupting with each stroke. So you just need to keep layering on top, grabbing a little bit. But notice how my brush doesn't need to go into thinner. I'm not trying to remove any of the paint I've got there. I'm just adding in some of that that blended color with the gray. So the gray has got a little bit of red, a little bit of green in it, and I'm using that. You can see how light that goes on, but you'll also notice how it starts to blend. I'm using that over the red, so it kind of gives me this creamy color. And even if I go into the warmer sides, if I say in the blue side, or if I go into the warmer side, the result will be very similar. You'll get some areas which are slightly tinted differently just because of the different colors in there. So I've got green in this one, but there's also a bit of purple in the other area. There's also a bit of orangey red in the other area. You'll start to see that effect it has. Now you could just go for a grey, a neutral grey, but the reason why we're using the other greys is because it keeps the color in. Like taking it back to the theory that we mentioned before, this creates a very chromatic color, a chromatic grey. And getting a little bit of scroll right just to get into those other areas where I think the light would hit, so it starts to make sense. Again, using the red on the scales now to kind of bring in some of that color, and you'll notice that on the underside I'm just trying to kind of reflect all of those areas, and then I start doing it on the head too, or on the scalp, on the, well, I guess it's like a weird head crown thing which he's got on his head. I start applying that onto the top sections, the top areas, the raised areas of the head, just like we did on the back, but we're just doing the same process now for the head instead, the face instead. Back to skin, working on the hand, just gently pulling that paint across the ears of the hand, and we can always smooth that out as well, but I wanted it to be slightly warmer, so I've gone in with the lighter orange area, the lighter orangey grey, desaturated grey, kind of pastel colour. So the radiant paints are really helpful in this way because they give us these really bright, vibrant colours, or they can also be used to give us kind of pastel colours. They basically they can be used alone, or they can be inserted and mixed with other colours to create like very strong versions of themselves, or desaturated versions if you use opposites on the colour wheel. So here I'm just trying to get some of that greeny blue into these areas. The paint is still quite wet. I haven't actually dry brushed this because I'm not trying to remove any of the brush strokes here. So you can see how I'm kind of having to go back into my blue mixture. When I actually dry brush, that will be easier to layer into. But this just creates a really like interesting difference in color contrast, and it creates interest in those areas because you're starting to see opposing colors we wouldn't necessarily expect to see them. So just getting into all the pecs and areas there, whilst also trying to bring in the attention to the chest here on the neck. So off camera, I basically went over the entire model, just copying the process that I showed you, and you can see how we've got all of these different colors now added, And what I did is, the Saurus models are really nice for this. I just gave it a pin wash using some of the mixtures I'd made before, like the blue. I just mixed that down, and I did the same thing with the orangey side. And now you can see how like that works with all of those areas of the crevices. The next part, I then started highlighting all of the areas and all of the tips with blue. And you can see how we're kind of going from that pink, that dark red, into that kind of light red, yellow, into yellow green, into the cyan blue in the highlights. And so I'm just being very careful now to try and be neat as possible, going in with a lighter orange into those areas now, onto the highlight, just to kind of bring out that color to work with the cyan blue in all of those recesses, and to kind of give it some of that lighter texture. So you can see as the kind of difference it makes to those edges. And I can't be bothered to do every scale as a highlight. I mean, I've actually got an army set, and one of the plans I have is to use this for my army, and to just kind of repeat this process across an entire army. However, I would go mad. I would go absolutely mad if I had to paint every single scale like this. I mean, this is just for fun. But you can see the effect it's kind of having. I'm just trying to keep it in, particularly in the raised areas. So here I'm kind of using it now on the edges as well. I've got my blue areas on the tip towards the very ends of the scales, and then I use the lighter yellowy color, lighter orangey color as well in different locations towards the kind of sides. And we just get this really nice kind of molten armor. Now regarding the shields, I'll actually showcase how I've done that. I've basically just given it a wash of like a phthalo green, but it's not really necessary. You can do the shields however you want. I'm trying to keep on the kind of the split complementary color wheel area, so you don't have to do this. So onto the shields, I basically started applying a phthalo green into all of this darker shaded lower areas, all of the areas facing down, just kind of copying exactly what we did on the scales. All of the areas in direct shadow, I've just basically started using that as my shadow color. And then you can go in with the radiant blue mixture, making it a little bit more green by adding a tiny bit of yellow, and you start adding that into the highlights, and you can see me doing it here. Not even trying to dry brush, just letting the kind of colors blend naturally together and just building up. This took a couple of attempts because I wasn't happy with the first time it came out, so I just waited for it to dry, and went over some of those areas again, still using the kind of the mid-tone green that I'd achieved as the kind of light base. But you can see me now using my dry brush to kind of shade those colors, bring them all together, and just dry brush around the edges, creating this kind of like emerald shield, so that it really stands out across the green of the against the red, so we get these really nice highlighted areas. Again, going back to my palette, adding in a kind of minty green again, just a tiny bit more scroll white this time. And the way I do this is just to the reason I'm doing this rather is just to make sure that I'm getting those highlights looking really bright, so I can see that the light is kind of shining there. This area at the back, I will probably go in with a darker green because it's not like in direct areas of highlight, it's actually in the shadow. So I'll come with a darker green. But here it's about just building the highlight here with even more of scroll white. And some of this is due to just the natural gloss of the paint when it's wet. But a lot of this is just obviously handcrafted by us as we're applying. And you can see I've added a tiny bit of yellow, and already you can start to see the effect that has. So although I'm focusing on the shield, I'm kind of keeping things on the same side, but I'm kind of again slowly moving around the color wheel. And this is actually how I did the shield, just applying a stroke of a light blue and then using a phthalo green over that as a kind of prime glaze. You can see the effect it's having. It's just kind of inking out the entire area. And then as that starts to dry, we'll go over that with a slightly lighter green again. So here I'm coming in with my lighter green just to the edges, just in the middle of that like armored leg shield, I guess. And I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. And what this does is it creates a really nice like shadowed emerald green, and then we can just blend it out again with our dry brush. I've left the green on there because I like the effect it was kind of creating. And we can just like add in a bit more of the shadow color where necessary, and then just dry brush that out. So for this next part, you can just go in and use the same colors to highlight the eyes. I probably actually switch to like a yellow here just so they stand out against the, we've already got like a blue color here, so I start to kind of like add a bit of a yellow, and that's basically just to break up all of the other colors we've got there, just so it stands out. So for this last part, it's totally optional. I just use a similar color that we used before as a glaze. So what I've done is I've watered down some red Muave, really watered it down with a tiny bit of Vermillion, and I've applied that over the model. Now I let the model dry for about 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours. I went out for a little bit and came back and it was dry to touch. And then you basically can just apply this, and what I'm trying to do now is just unify everything. The red and orangey areas I've got there on the tail, I kind of found them to be a bit too strong. There's a bit too much going on, and so I've started to apply some of this glaze over all of the areas just to unify it. Now I think it kind of like dulls a lot of the color, but when it dries you'll start to see some of those areas pop out again. Now what you don't want to do is do so much that all of the cyan crevices, they start to totally disappear. We still want hints of those popping out, and as you can see there, to be honest, this is pretty much, apart from losing the glossiness, this is actually pretty much what it stays like by the end. So the same thing again on the material. I won't go into detail in that. I do start painting that, but it's probably not that important for the basis of this video, but I'll just leave it on in the background and talk about it. I think the thing to think about with this exercise is just to keep in mind again the colors you're using, and just work your way around the color wheel and where it makes sense. So you can see how, although we've used very little of the kind of cyan and blue of the entirety of the scales and skin, those colors are still present on the model. And so when I actually come in with this really strong green, it's not so overpowering. You can see hints of the colors in the same color family of this kind of bluey green across the model, and because of that it doesn't kind of break the composition. So we're maintaining that color harmony. We're making sure that the colors are that we're using across the shield and the armor are still present across the actual flesh itself and scales itself. Now the next step would probably be to add some purples into this green, but that's probably overkill. You can do that if you'd like to, and please share with me your results, and I'd love to see what you come up with and how you get on with painting this model. So I'm really trying to get these videos out in a timely fashion to you guys, but also not rushing, and I'm trying to make sure I don't stuff too much information into a single video. That's the whole point of doing these fundamental videos, to give you guys the basis of what you need. But if I did move through too quickly, do let me know. Leave any questions you have for me in the comment section and I'll get back to you. It's been really fun trying this model, and I hope it makes sense. But again, reach out. God bless you guys, hope you're doing well, and speak soon. Ciao.